Good morning. Bonjour tout le monde. Je m'appelle Stephen Staples. Je suis le président de l'Institut Rideau. I'm the president of the Rideau Institute, and on behalf of our organization and the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, we're very pleased to release today a new report called Search and Replace, the Case for a Made in Canada Fixed-Wing Search and Rescue Fleet, published today. And it was authored by University of British Columbia political science professor Michael Byers and his associate Stuart Webb, who is a researcher at the Salt Spring Forum, and they join us here today. The report attempts to reset the debate on the fixed-wing search and rescue procurement contract and responds to recent news that the Treasury Board has granted first phase approval of the $3.8 billion contract for these new search and rescue planes. And so first I would like to ask Stuart Webb to come up and present the main findings of the report, followed by Michael Byers, and we'll have an opportunity for some questions. Stuart?
Good morning. Effective search and rescue requires reliable and modern equipment. Yet Canada's fixed-wing search and rescue aircraft, the CC-115 Buffaloes, which operates on the west coast of Canada, and the C-130 Hercules, which operates in central, Atlantic, and Arctic Canada, are more than 45 years old. When Inuit boy Burnt Winters became lost during a blizzard on sea ice off the coast of Labrador in January 2012, all three search and rescue Hercules were unable to deploy due to mechanical reasons. Last month, the Treasury Board gave first phase approval of the $3.8 billion for fixed-wing search and rescue aircraft. A statement of operational requirements will be drafted this summer, and the final decision will be made sometime in 2014. Drafting the statement of operational requirements is a key phase for any Department of National Defense procurement process. In 2009, the Department of National Defense proposed to sole source the Italian-made C-27J Spartan for fixed-wing search and rescue. Industry Canada rejected the proposal because the requirements have been so narrowly drawn as to exclude any other aircraft from consideration. Several tried and Canadian products, new or refurbished Buffaloes produced by Viking in Victoria or Calgary, and the Q400s produced by Bombardier in Toronto and Montreal, were ruled out preemptorily. A fair operational statement, the statement of operational requirements, would allow Canadian-made planes to compete head-to-head against foreign-made products. The Buffalo is a perfect aircraft for the Western Canada, for the rough coastlines and mountainous terrains. Able to fly as slow as 70 knots, with great maneuverability, with plenty of excess lift and power, it can also take off from short, soft runways, even sports fields. A different aircraft is required for the rest of Canada, unfortunately. With greater distances and less mountainous terrain, aircraft operating out of Trenton, Ontario, or Greenwood, Nova Scotia, must be able to reach the high Arctic and conduct extended missions in the North Atlantic. The Q400, with its high cruising speed of 1,367 knots, is well suited for the job. Cruising speed of 367 knots. The off-the-shelf version has a range of 1,360 nautical miles, which can be easily extended with extra fuel tanks. The Q400s can take off and land from gravel runways of less than 500 meters, which is handy in the Arctic. Bombardier already makes a variant of the Q400 for maritime patrol and has sold the previous version, to the Q300, to the Swedish and Japanese Coast Guards and the Mexican Navy. Q400s do not have a rear loading ramp, which the Department of National Defense considers to be essential for the safe parachuting by search and rescue technicians. But deflectors can be installed to create a more favorable airflow by for jumping from side doors. While using aircraft with a slower minimum speed also reduces the airflows. There are other options to this problem. Q400s for search and rescue in other countries even have drop hatches in the underbellies as to allow for accurate and safe deployment of life rafts and other equipment. Search and rescue aircraft are not required to double as cargo planes and therefore do not need ramps for this purpose. The Royal Canadian Air Force is already well suited for this task, including as it has 4 C-17 Globemasters and 17 new C-130J Hercules. All of the foreign-made airplanes competing for the Canadian search and rescue contract have serious limitations. The Italian-made Spartan can only land on hard runways, rendering a problematic choice for a country of thousands of unimproved runways, heavy rains, and spring melts. The Spanish-made EADS C-295 requires an inconvenient 844 meters for takeoff and 680 meters for landing. The US-made Bell Boeing V-22 Osprey, which can convert itself in flight from a turboprop plane to a helicopter, which makes it intuitively attractive for search and rescue. But the Osprey has experienced many technical setbacks, and its complex mechanics would almost certainly result in a lower serviceability rate and higher maintenance costs. The sticker price for the Osprey is also expensive, $69 million, while the Spartan 53 and the new Hercules 48 million are nearly as costly. By comparison, Canadian-made planes are a bargain, which is no small matter in time-constrained budgets. New Buffaloes, which would cost between 18 to 20 million, while Q400s cost 30 million. Last but not least, Canadian-made planes create Canadian-made jobs. Thank you. I'll turn this over to Dr. Byers for your questions.
Merci beaucoup, Stuart. Merci à tous. Comme Stuart a dit, nous avons écrit un rapport au sujet de les avions de recherche et sauvetage. Et la question de est-ce qu'il y a des avions faits au Canada qui sont bien capables de faire le job? Et notre réponse est oui. Il y a des avions faits au Canada qui sont bien capables de faire le travail de recherche et sauvetage pour tous les Canadiens. Ladies and gentlemen, Stuart's already outlined our report. Just a couple of things I would like to emphasize. The first is that this issue of fixed-wing search and rescue aircraft and the replacement of our aging fleet is an issue that has been around for a long time. The replacement of the fleet was initially a commitment made by the Chrétien government, a commitment that has been renewed several times since then by the Harper government. And yet there have been a series of delays and failures in this procurement. The most significant of these failures occurred in 2009 when the Department of National Defense proposed to sole source the Italian-made Spartan C-27Js, and were told by Industry Canada that they could not do so, that in fact the specifications for fixed-wing search and rescue had been fixed so as to exclude all but the one Italian-made plane. And so the Department of National Defense had to go back to the drawing table. In 2010, the National Research Council of Canada conducted an in-depth analysis, released a report that said that one of the responses to this challenge that was needed was in fact a mixed fleet, a fleet of more than one type of aircraft. Stuart has already highlighted the fact that on the west coast of Canada, the ability to fly low and slow is absolutely essential, given the mountainous terrain, the rugged coastlines, and most of the search and rescues occur along that coastline. The Buffalo can fly as slow as 70 knots. It is the perfect aircraft for that job. We do not use our Hercules aircraft, our existing Hercules search and rescue on the West Coast, because they cannot fly low and slow enough. And so as we move forward in this procurement, thinking about two different types of aircraft to serve different needs in different parts of Canada is absolutely essential. And also a realization that when we're looking at search and rescue, we are looking at planes for search and rescue and not for tactical cargo lift in places like Afghanistan. We do not need tactical cargo lift aircraft to do this essential job. And that means that we can look at made in Canada options. We highlight the option of the Q400, built in Toronto by Montreal-based Bombardier, an aircraft that is good enough for Air Canada, Porter, and WestJet, and good enough for the coast guards of other countries, and yet has not been seriously considered by the Department of National Defence for the Canadian search and rescue job. These are planes that can fly much faster than a Hercules with extended fuel tanks, can fly just as far as a Hercules, can land on runways that are just as short and soft as a Hercules. They are cheaper than a Hercules, and they're made in Canada by Canadians. We haven't come to an unequivocal conclusion as to which planes are best, because we think there needs to be a tendered and fully competitive process. Our concern right now is that as the Department of National Defence drafts the Statement of Requirements this summer, that it not draft those requirements in a way that excludes the Canadian-made planes, that the Canadian-made planes by Viking and Bombardier have the opportunity to compete on a level playing field with the foreign-made aircraft, and that as part of that competition, the creation of Canadian jobs and the cost of the actual airplanes be central considerations. We think the Canadian-made planes can compete. We think they can complete well, and that the Canadian government, the Department of National Defence, owe it to Canadians to ensure that Viking and Bombardier are fully involved in this process. Si vous avez des questions, if you have any questions, Stuart and I would be happy to take them now. Merci beaucoup.
I don't understand the politics here. It almost seems like a no-brainer to buy a Canadian plane. So my first question. Second question is, how does this relate to the fiasco around F-35s and the advice that may or may not have come from DND or may have come from the cabinet, or we don't exactly know? Is there a relation?
Yeah. Well, certainly considering the made in Canada planes is, in my view, a no-brainer. And I wouldn't want to prejudge the result of a fully competitive tendered process. And why have these planes not been included so far in that consideration? Well, I think that may have something to do with the desire on the part of some people to have a fleet that's capable of doing other tasks in addition to search and rescue. So, for instance, if you go back and look at the procurement history for this project, you see a lot of talk about NATO cargo pallets and whether or not the planes can actually transport NATO cargo pallets. Now, NATO cargo pallets are not part of the search and rescue function. And so that discussion would seem to suggest that other considerations were front of mind. We think that, especially now that the Royal Canadian Air Force has the 4 C-17s and the 17 new Hercules tactical lift aircraft, that any of that consideration about cargo capacity can be pushed entirely to the side, and that we should be focusing on search and rescue here. On the relationship to the F-35, we all know that the F-35 has been a highly problematic procurement. And there, as in this case, we have seen some narrowing of the requirements so as to exclude all but one aircraft. With regards